Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I came across a rather startling story, maybe frightening would be even more accurate, and I did not see how I could avoid talking about it in this podcast. So what I will do, I will read the story or parts of the story to you, and then we'll try to make sense out of it. I would encourage you, if you have any thoughts on it, to leave any of your thoughts in the comments section directly below this podcast. And again, this is a very alarming story, very alarming, at least to me. So let me put on my eyeglasses so I can read, and then we'll go ahead and tackle it. The the title of the article is really enough, pretty much enough by itself. It says Putin issues ominous nuclear warning to US. The story was published in Newsweek. Now, I am not a big fan of Newsweek, to be honest. The quality, I think, of Newsweek is not that good. But I double checked this, and to the best of my knowledge, the information in this article, at least as reported, is accurate, or at least it is verified by other sources. So let me read it for you, and then again, you can make up your mind for yourself, obviously. But I think it's something that people need to discuss and people need to be aware of. Again, Putin issues ominous nuclear warning to the West. The story was just published yesterday. No, I'm sorry, today, not yesterday, today. Russian President Vladimir Putin issued an ominous nuclear warning to the West, saying that his country is technically, not sure what technically means, but is technically ready for a nuclear war. Okay, now, to my knowledge, a lot of countries are technically ready for a nuclear war. The US is technically ready for a nuclear war. Israel is technically ready for a nuclear war. So are India, Pakistan, and a whole host of other countries. So why would Putin say this? That is the frightening part, I suppose, if you get my drift. Why say it unless you are seriously considering it? Because, I mean, it's not like people didn't know that already, that Putin was technically ready for a nuclear war. That goes back to the old days of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was also always ready for a nuclear war. I remember the old Turkish-Cuban Missile Crisis, which was miscalled in the US, the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it also involved Turkey because it was the US that placed nukes in Turkey first, which led to the Soviet Union placing nukes in Cuba. Fortunately, that problem was resolved between Kennedy and Khrushchev, and we are still around. So there was no global nuclear war, but there could have been. So that has been true for a long time. That's why this story is concerning to me, and I think it should be concerning to all of us. From a military technical point of view, we are, of course, ready. Our nuclear forces are constantly in a state of combat readiness. Putin told state-run TV channel Russia One and news agency RIA Novosti in an interview on Tuesday. Okay, again, was that statement primarily intended for domestic consumption, or was it intended as a warning to the US? I don't know. I don't think anybody really can know. Well, maybe that's not true. I suppose the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, have ways of intercepting electronic intelligence, and so they may know more than this story tells. I don't know. But nobody, of course, can read Putin's mind. We don't have that kind of technology, as far as I know. So I don't know what it means, but it certainly is a very startling turn of events. His remarks come days after he warned during the annual State of the Nation address in Moscow that, quote, his strategic nuclear forces are in a state of full readiness, end of quote. Putin has said since September 2022 that Russia was prepared to use nuclear weapons to defend its territorial integrity, declaring that, quote, this is not a bluff, end of quote. In his interview, Putin said that there has so far been no need to use tactical nuclear weapons in his war against Ukraine, which was launched in February of 2022. Apart from US President Joe Biden, there are enough experts in the sphere of Russian-American relations and strategic restraint, so I don't think that everything is going to go head on here, but we are ready for it. That was another quotation from Vladimir Putin. The Russian leader also said the US is developing nuclear forces. Again, I don't know why he would say that. Obviously, the US has been developing nuclear forces. The US is the only country to have ever used nukes on another country at the end of World War II on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's a bit confusing to me as to what he is talking about. Okay, Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons, quote, if the question is about the existence of the Russian state, end quote. Its sovereignty and independence, Putin said, quote, everything is written down in our strategy. We haven't changed it. End of quote. Continuing, the idea that a nuclear war could break out amid the conflict in Ukraine has been floated by numerous Russian officials. Yes, many Russian officials have said it, but as far as I know, not Putin himself, including Dmitry Medvedev. I always have trouble pronouncing his name, Russia's former president and prime minister. Kremlin propagandists have also routinely warned of a looming world war and strikes by Russia on NATO territory over aid and weapons provided by the Biden administration and members of the military alliance to Kiev. That's, of course, the capital of Ukraine. Last week, state TV host Vladimir Solovyov, one of the most prominent figures in the Kremlin-backed media, suggested launching nuclear strikes on 3 members of the NATO military alliance, France, Germany, and the United States. Putin warned during his annual State of the Nation address last month that, quote, Russia won't let anyone interfere in its internal affairs. Well, I don't know what that means precisely. I guess unless he thinks of Ukraine as a part of Russia, which I guess he does, so maybe that's what he means. I don't know. I can't read his mind again. But maybe he's talking about Ukraine, and that's what he means by internal affairs. I don't know. He appeared to be responding to French President Emmanuel Macron's suggestion that NATO members could send ground troops to Ukraine. That was not a very smart thing to say, to be honest. I don't know why Macron said that. Other NATO allies, including the US, ruled out doing so after Macron's suggestion. Smartly. Again, I don't know why Macron would say such a thing. that is really irresponsible. Now, look, everyone knows that that could happen, but you simply don't say it. That's not something that you should reveal or discuss. And perhaps this latest statement by Putin is a direct response to what Macron said. That would seem logical to me, but again, there is no way of knowing. But again, Macron started it, not Putin. Macron is the one who gave the first warning. And Putin is simply responding, I think, or it would seem, to what Macron said. Some have raised concerns that a red line for Russia may be Ukraine's attempts to recapture Crimea, the Black Sea Peninsula that Putin illegally annexed. Of course, whether it was illegally or not is subject to dispute. And Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has vowed to take back. So, all right, that is the story. It's not a very long story, but that was the entire story. It is certainly something to keep an eye on. Let me take my eyeglasses off since I don't need them anymore. Whether there is any further developments in that area, I certainly hope not. I don't want to see World War III. Who would? I don't think that Putin would want to see World War III, nor would Biden, nor would Macron, who made the first threats. So why make the statements in the first place? Now, here's what should be said. The kinds of nuclear weapons which are generally used are much more precise than the ones which were used at the ends of World War II, meaning that if a nation like Russia or the US were to use nuclear weapons, it would not necessarily have the broad range of fallout that the nuclear bomb being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the Enola Gay aircraft had, where even till this day, some elderly people who are survivors of that nuclear event still are physically disfigured. Now, obviously, there would be some problems like that. Obviously, some people would be disfigured. Some people would simply die in the moment, and some people would die a slow death. But present-day nuclear weapons are much more precise. I guess you can say that's good or bad. The good thing is just what I said, that they're precise. The bad thing is the fact that they are precise might lead a country, whether France, for example, who initially made the threat under Macron, or Biden, or Putin, or some other country, to go ahead and launch a nuclear strike. In other words, if they realize that the nuclear weapons are not going to wipe out an entire country, at least not a single nuclear weapon, then they may be more prone to use that nuclear weapon. Here's the problem. Once a nuclear weapon is dropped, say by the US, say by France, say by Russia, that would not be the end of it. The other countries, say Russia or the US or France, would respond with a nuclear weapon in the same way. And so there would be a continual barrage of nuclear weapons going back and forth between the East and the West, most likely. And so even though nuclear weapons are now more precise, that is no guarantee that we will survive as a planet. That will still be World War III. The use of nuclear weapons is pretty much synonymous with World War III. I don't see how anybody can see it otherwise. In fact, some people actually have argued, I think somewhat weakly, that we are actually in World War III right now, with the wars going on between Russia and Ukraine and between Israel and Gaza. I don't think that's true, because those are simply two separate territories. When we look around the world in other places, we don't see those kinds of things, except maybe, I guess you could say, in Yemen. But basically, there is no really world war. There are a number of different regional wars, but they are not related to each other in any way, shape, or form. For example, even though you can say that the wars in Germany and Japan were separate, still, both countries were members of the same alliance, and therefore it was a world war, because you had the Allied powers fighting against the Axis powers. That, by definition, made it a world war. So it's difficult to say what will happen now. I don't know. You don't know. Maybe somebody knows, but if they do know, they're not saying anything. All we have are reports. Putin said this. Macron said that. In my view, Macron's statement, which triggered it, was completely irresponsible. In fact, if I were a French citizen, I don't know if there are impeachment provisions in France, but I would guess there's something like that. I would try to impeach Macron, because that's really going overboard. You don't say something like that. That is not something that you talk about, not in public anyway. You may say that behind closed doors, but not in public. So I must say that I am concerned by the story. It may be nothing. It may be simply talk. Let's hope so. But it may be more than talk. We don't know. We don't know what is being discussed in private rooms, or, as people used to say, in smoke-filled rooms. And I would imagine that there are a lot of people planning for the possibility of nuclear strikes on their own countries, in addition to Russia, US, and France. I would assume that all NATO countries, for example, are involved in preparations for that right now. That would certainly be the smart thing to do. And perhaps other countries too, perhaps Japan. I think almost invariably North Korea. North Korea has recently made some very frightening threats of its own. And for all I know, those threats may be related to this in some way, or to what Macron said. I don't know. But we live in a very unstable world. And the first world in particular is causing all this mischief. And I think we need to be on the lookout for any dangerous things that may occur over the horizon. And that horizon is not long. It wouldn't take long for a weapon, a nuclear weapon, to go from Russia to the US, Russia to France, or from France or the US to Russia. That is a very, very brief period of time. I remember, in closing, when I was in elementary school, watching these duck and cover movies. Well, just really one movie. You can find it on YouTube. It features literally this situation where this creature a turtle, I guess, is putting his head in and out of his shell. And the announcer keeps on trying to get the turtle or tortoise, either one, I don't know, to put his head outside. And that animal does so reluctantly. And then the announcer says, see, he is being careful. So should you, boys and girls. Be ready. And then duck and cover. And there was a song. If you want to hear the silly song, you can listen to it on that YouTube public service announcement. But I remember watching that in elementary school, and we were all laughing at it for two reasons. One, because the clothing that the kids were wearing were 1950s clothing, and we were in the 1960s, so it looked kind of old-fashioned to us. Second, because of the absurdity of the film. Even we, as second or third graders, could recognize that absurdity. I mean, you have a kid walking up to an adult. In the background is a nuclear mushroom cloud, meaning a nuclear bomb has just exploded. The kid has a broad smile on his face. He walks up to an adult who was simply standing there in a very nonchalant manner, also with a very broad smile on his face, which makes no sense, of course, and basically kind of indicates without talking, you don't hear any voice, where do I go? And the adult points him to an air raid shelter. My thought, I remember when I was watching the thing, even in second or third grade, is, well, why isn't that adult there already? You know, what is he, like a crossing guard or something? I couldn't figure it out. It made no sense. But he was just standing there like nothing had happened, not even looking at the mushroom cloud, but pointing the kid in a very happy way to the closest nuclear air raid shelter. It was really silly. And the actual drills that we did involved getting under our desks, putting our arms over our heads like this. That was the drill. And when the alarm went off again, we were allowed to get up from on our desks and sit down on our chairs once again. Now, that did not really feel very entertaining. I guess because we weren't old enough to realize the absurdity of that exercise. Getting under a desk and covering your head with your arms is not going to protect you from nuclear fallout. It simply won't. Nuclear fallout is really, really powerful. Your arms are not going to be a barrier to it. But what I think was happening is this. The US government, which obviously made the commercial or the public service announcement in cooperation with Channel 13 in northern New Jersey and New York City, realized that, well, there's nothing we can really do to prevent Russia from launching a nuclear missile on the US, I should say the Soviet Union from doing that. We used to call it Russia. We can't really do anything to stop them, but we can at least give people some sense of agency, some sense that they have control over it. Now, is that control realistic? No. But it was a way of, I suppose, comforting us that, well, even if the Soviet Union does launch a nuclear weapon, and that weapon affects us in New York City, I was living in Queens at the time, we could protect ourselves from it. We would not die because our arms were over our heads. Really silly. And really, it was in a sense a propaganda video. That's basically what it was. But it was also an attempt to make people feel better, to pacify them, I suppose. Now, those duck and cover films were later revived, I understand, in the late 60s and early 70s. At least that's what I was told by my students, because they had seen them. And I was surprised, especially considering how silly those kids looked in 1950s clothing to us. And these people would have been in elementary school maybe in the 80s or 90s. So that seemed kind of odd to me, but again, that's really irrelevant. Still, it showed that there was still concern over a nuclear attack and a desire to make people feel better. Many people that I knew had actually built air raid shelters outside their homes and stocked those shelters with food, with canned food and drink. We did not do that for a number of reasons. One, my parents thought that it was silly, and we tried to imagine ourselves, I guess, living in an air raid shelter. I mean, how long could you, even with food and drink, how long could you realistically live in an air raid shelter? I don't think long enough to survive. As soon as you got up, you would be immediately exposed to the nuclear fallout. So we did not build one. Plus, and perhaps most importantly, we were living in garden apartments at that time. So we could not build one because the outside lawn was not our property. But later, when we moved into a private home in 1968, I believe, we didn't do it either. So again, that whole thing did not really seem to concern my parents. And I looked around my neighborhood, and I don't think anybody had an air raid shelter outside their homes. So it wasn't just my family, it was the entire neighborhood, maybe the entire city. I don't know. Well, again, please watch this story. I think it is a very important story to keep in mind. It may mean nothing. Nothing may come of it. Interpreting what political leaders are saying is extraordinarily difficult, because sometimes there is a cover story or a narrative which underlies the story that we are not aware of. And so maybe this is just a game of threat and counter threat, kind of like poker, but maybe not. Maybe it is a legitimate threat of using nukes. And that is something that we should all be concerned about if we value the continuation of life here on planet Earth. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.